It's the Jamming
Fanzine
podcast.
I mean, the thing about a fanzine was holding it in your hand, right? And looking at the way it's been put together and the punk way it's been put together, quite frankly. And it had a staple in it, you know, and that is a fanzine, right?
In late 1977, as a school kid in South London, inspired by the DIY culture of punk, I started a music zine. I had no long-term plan, and certainly no idea that over the next decade, jamming would grow to become a national, even an international monthly magazine. And I certainly could not have imagined that in 2021 there would be a full-colour book collecting together what we have called the best of jamming, selections and stories from the fanzine that grew up, 1977 to 86. For the Jamming Fanzine podcast, I'm hosting conversations with some of these former contributors, photographers, musicians, scenesters and school friends, and seeing if we can't, through the rose-tinted glasses of history, offer some sort of perspective on the heady days of that heavyweight decade.
It was just the joy of going, yeah, this is really good. There are some really good interviews in here. There's all sorts of bands in here. You should see it. What is it? Oh, it's a fanzine. Yeah, great. Because there are a few around, but none, obviously, that I thought was as good as jamming. Do you want to buy a copy of Jamming?
Episode 2, Mods and Sods.
And welcome back, everyone, to the Jamming Fanzine podcast. My name's Tony. If you haven't figured that out, I'm the one started this fanzine that became a magazine that went kaput, that 35 years later has been revived and compiled into this beautiful book, which is out now at the point that you hear this for certain in the UK and Europe. And depending when you're listening to this, it will be out or will have been out since December the 2nd in the rest of the world. Now, we did get off to a great start with episode 1, in which I talked to some of my closest school friends from back in the day, that being the late 70s, about the birth of jamming. We're going to fast forward a couple of years on this episode to 1979. There was a mod revival in full swing in the UK. There was also a skinhead revival in full swing in the UK, which gave us two-tone, of course, and more besides. It also gave us a little bit of violence, these revivals that were going on, because there were also rockabillys around. The punk rockers weren't going anywhere, not some of them at least, were growing their hair longer and longer vertically, upwards from their heads, and new romantics were just around the corner, and in short, pretty much everybody who had anything to do with music made a fashion statement about it. It made for some tense times at gigs and on the streets, and we will discuss that in this episode. But it also made for some great, great music and, you know, some okay music. And we have representatives today who are, all of them made great music and I believe continue to do so. They are Mark Bedders Bedford of Madness. I think you've heard of them. Guy Pratt, well, some people call him Pratty, I don't. And if you haven't heard of Guy, you will certainly have heard of some of the people he's played with since he was in the band Speedball back in 1979 and for a couple of years beyond. And then we also have my great friend Brett Buddy Ascott, who was in the Chords back in the day. Probably most people's idea of the most successful of, quote, mod revival bands. For my money, absolutely the best of them. And all three of these people are absolute gents. They all know how to talk. They all know how to laugh. And in the conversation that follows, we do plenty of both. We edited this conversation down under the 1 hour mark. We don't want it to be prog rock length. We'd like it to be punk rock new wave length. Just enough time for you to get inspired to form your own band, publish your own fanzine, or perhaps figure out which fashion movement you want to revive next. I'll be back at the end of the show just to wrap things up. And without further ado, episode 2, the Jamming Fanzine podcast. This is an absolute joy and a treat for me because not only have I known all of you since 1979, 1980 or earlier, but I'd like to consider I'm still friends with you all. And the three of you all contributed to this Best of Jamming book, for which I'm really grateful. And I think it came out looking utterly fantastic. What we're going to do is talk about, obviously, the era that we got to know each other in, and to what extent fanzines played any major role in that, or to what extent even jamming played any role in any of our lives. But as much as anything, it's a wonderful opportunity just to talk and reunite with people. I'm going to go in chronological order of knowing people, and that would, Guy, you and I have known each other the longest. So do you want to introduce yourself and remind me where we first met? Because I remember.
Yes. Hello, Guy Pratt, bassist, alcoholic. We met because, was it your brother was going out with the daughter of my uncle's partner? They were doctors on the Aylesbury estate in Camberwell. And there was this Boxing Day party they had every year, and we always used to go. And one year you were in a bedroom. I think you had a guitar and you were trying to play. Was it Substitute or Pinball Wizard? And I showed you how to play Substitute.
You did. I think you showed me how to play Pinball Wizard as well.
Well, the intro.
Yeah.
I would have been I was really showing off. And yeah, I might have known it. It's actually quite simple once you figure it's all one finger at a time.
It's classic Pete Townsend with that ringing bass note, funnily enough. The ringing.
Purcell, which comes from Purcell, he says. It's actually, yeah.
A couple of years later, it would have been around probably about June of 1979 when the mod revival was in full swing. I had been taken to see a band called Speedball by their manager. They were a 4-piece until 2 of them, I believe, got put away for
stealing gear from music shops. So that's why the band was so well equipped.
Yes. And they decided to double down and maybe not risk that in the future by getting one person for the 2 of them. And they hired you.
And steal so much.
Yeah. And I walked into Alaska Studios to interview Speedball. And Roger had told me, the manager had told me, we've got this great new bass player. You'll love him. And I walked in and you were like, mate, remember me? The Boxing Day party. And that was that.
I would have been desperately trying to talk down. Mate, remember me for the Boxing
I recall you wearing a Mod Target t-shirt.
All right.
Because that was the era. And talking of Mod Target t-shirts, in between, and probably just a few weeks before I met Guy, I'd have seen your band play for the first time. So, Buddy, introduce yourself.
I'm Brett Buddy Ascott. I used to thump the tubs for the Chords. I now play with the Fallen Leaves and the 79ers. And there's been a lot of water under the bridge since the earlier incarnation. But I met you when you were a cherub-faced 15-year-old at the Wellington, Tony. You were at the side of the stage.
Well, you're the guys. So if I just put sign up, we need to get to Bedders, but he'll have a big piece, obviously. Because the first time I heard about the mod thing was when I worked as a sort of office junior at this graphic design company. We always had a Capital Radio on. And I walked in the office one day to the tail end of an interview with Clem Burke. And he says, and they said, well, thanks very much. You went, yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to all the mod bands out there, to the Chords, and I was like, what? And it was the first time I heard of the mod thing was Clem Burke. And he mentioned the Chords. So you were the first band I heard of.
I don't think he ever saw us, but I did meet him and he bought me a drink in the ship.
There you go.
So, yeah, I would have seen you, Buddy, first week of May. 1979, when I turned 15 at the end of April, managed to get to 5 gigs in 5 nights. And the third time I saw the Chords, 2 nights later, when you were filmed for London Weekend Television, Janet Street Porter, and the manager of the Wellington, sort of as you allude to, as you write about in this Best of Jamming book, seeing that I was way too young to be in there, and we were just confirming before we started recording, there's no way you would get into a gig like that nowadays.
No.
Decided that rather than have me dancing around in front of the stage and showing that there were underage people in the venue, would put me behind the stage, which meant the camera was on me throughout, and confirmed that they were letting underage people into the venue. But in the 2 nights between my first seeing you and then seeing you for the filmed show, I kind of felt like a sort of rise and fall of the mod movement in about 48 hours.
That's about how long it lasted.
And I was actually doing some homework for this get together, and according to a book I was reading, Mark, a group that you have been in on and off for your entire life, changed their name and had their debut performance under that name that same first week of May.
Yeah, my name is Mark Bedford, also known as Bedders, and I've played in Madness for a very long time.
Hey.
And when I'm thinking of meeting you, I think I met you before we ever did Madness ever did an interview for Jamming. I'm pretty sure of it, because we did play with some mod bands. We played with Secret Affair, I remember, at the Lyceum, or there was a mod band sort of bill at the Lyceum, which we were on. And also we played with Secret Affair in Aylesbury Friars as well, probably just before we had a record out. So what was your, where do you remember meeting me then?
Well, my memory of that is that moving on from doing the fanzine, I got to start writing for The Face. And Nick Logan had what was the editor and founder of The Face and something of a publishing genius, really, at least a visionary, had a very, very smart idea. Madness were getting a lot of bad press at the time and also kind of wouldn't speak to the press for reasons we will probably get into. And he said, well, what better way to have cover the band that sort of appeals to 16-year-olds in Harringtons and short haircuts than to send a 16-year-old on the road with Madness. So originally I was invited to go on tour with you, but I had my O-levels, so I couldn't do it. So after they were done, I got to come up to Nottingham with you, where you were recording a couple of nights for TV at the Theatre Royal there. And we did I got to stay in a posh hotel for the first time, a far cry from the flea pits I stayed in with Guy, with Speedball. And all kinds of debauchery went on actually in that 48 hours. And at the end of it all, I got not one, but two songs dedicated to me on the encore of the second night. And you dedicated Deceives the Eye to me for reasons that I've actually spent the rest of my life a little like a Zen koan trying to figure out. I think it was somehow something to do with the fact that I don't know. I think you had just Madness won me over, to be quite honest. I mean, that's the God's honest truth of it. I came in somewhat fearful of this very, very successful band and the position I was in. And a lot of that fear was well-founded, actually. I learned in that 48 hours that I would not pick a fight with any members of Madness. But at the same time, you were all just like absolutely charming to me. You all took me under your wings. And I'd like to consider we stayed friends ever since.
Of course, yeah, that's very nice. I mean, I will say that we weren't far away from our O-levels and A-levels at that point as well. I mean, I must have been 18, 19, so...
It's funny, a year is 10 years.
Well, exactly, yeah. When you're that age, yeah, it is. It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually looking at that, and yeah, a guy, I think you were saying you were 17 when you were in Speedball.
I was, yeah. So I wouldn't have got into the Wellington now.
Right. Yeah, you'd be carded now, wouldn't you?
Yeah, yeah.
And Mark would never have made his debut at the Hope and Anchor. Because you would have been 17 when Madness made their debut there.
That's right. A lot of the early gigs, yeah, were definitely. I was just about 17, so yeah.
And it's really, when you think about it, I mean, you seemed so much older to me, to be honest, because I was 15. And when I met you, you'd have been 18, I'd have been 16, and it would have been like Big Brother stuff. But I mean, you were a pop star at the age of 17. For you, Mark, to go from sort of joining a band to being in the charts in the space of a few months, a year?
Yeah, it would have been, I think, a year and a half, probably, something like that, but still incredibly short time. But the possibilities were open then, and they, that was the thing at the end of the 70s, what it gave everyone. And after punk, it actually blew it all open for a lot of people in a lot of different bands, and we were one of them. I think we had a lot of luck meeting the specials at the right time as well, I would suggest.
That was an amazing confluence, wasn't it? The fact that there was no, you just happened on the same thing, right?
That's right. No, very true. Yeah, and I'd seen them play with the Clash, funny enough, as the Coventry Automatics when they were a lot more punky, but they did have the reggae element in. And then they appeared again as the specials, and they played at the Hope and Anchor, and that was the night that we saw them, and we got, we started talking to them, and that was when Jerry Dammers said at the time, if I sign a deal, I'm going to have my own record label. That was the kind of ambition of bands, which was really, really good.
So you were both influenced by the ska thing from and blue beat from the 60s, but completely independently of each other.
And in different ways as well, because they came more from, because Birmingham and Coventry had a big reggae scene.
Yeah.
So they came from that heavier reggae scene. And also, they knew all the old stuff as well. But we came more from 60s music, but that was part of it, was ska as well. So I think that was a great thing. That's always been the good thing about Madness, is that you speak to anyone in the band, you'll get such a wide range of music that everyone likes. Those things always come in, and we were never afraid of changing them a bit or, bringing some kind of other influence in. So it's kind of kept us going, I think, in many ways.
Well, and they're so close, because actually it was Tony, you described it perfectly as you described the mod scene as a cul-de-sac, which it so completely was. I mean, it's, it was a lovely, and whereas what you guys were doing was so close, like stylists, we all wore the same suits, we all, and it was early 60s roots and everything, but you just had that tiny little thing that made you something that could just go and go on,
Yeah.
Guys, what's funny is at the time is that Rob, the guitarist in Speedball, his brother, who was very sophisticated, actually used to occasionally do the cloakroom at Blitz. Remember, this was happening at the same time.
Right, yes.
And he used to invite me down. So come on, I'll get you in. And I was just like, oh, no way, man. That's no. And of course, now I'm like, you fucking idiot. Why didn't you go?
I think what you maybe put in some context is in the UK, I'm not sure about in the US, but in the UK, it was a real monolithic culture thing. One week, everyone was Teds, in the next few months, everyone was into two-tone. Then everyone was into but everyone was a new romantic.
You've missed out the rockabillys.
Well, yeah, exactly. And a mod, and it seemed a mod for a very tiny amount of time.
Yeah.
But people moved and shifted really quickly from one thing to the next at that point. So.
But we had such a vibrant music press, and they were all vying to put the next big thing on the front page.
4 weeklies. Think about that.
Yeah. Astounding. It's
amazing when you think about it.
And they all sold in the 6 figures as well. I mean, Enemy was selling $250,000 a week.
America had 1 monthly.
Yeah, I know. It is crazy to think about it. And then, lovely segue. Thank you for that, Guy. And then there were all the hundreds and hundreds of fanzines.
Yeah.
There were also coming out, and there was a lot of fanzines around the mod revival. And I have to say, Guy, you mentioned that cul-de-sac point, and I've sort of acutely aware of that. You and I, Guy, and I know Buddy as well. We were all big fans of the Who. And so, it seemed great. Oh, we're going to get our own movement. But other than, I'm going to be honest here, other than the Chords, Speedball, who never really recorded, and a couple of Purple Heart singles. I mean, that's about it. And the Quadrophenia movie, which, lives on. And it is interesting that on the other side of it, what Madness were propagating and the whole two-tone thing, I spend way more time these days listening to rocksteady and ska and reggae than I do to the 60s rock music, and the bands all had more longevity. And interestingly, all of the albums that came out of two-tone, maybe not every last single, but all the albums that came out of those bands that then went off and did their own deals have stood the test of time. It's not a matter of backing a wrong horse with mod. I think there were lots of things that contributed to that, but certainly from the perspective of doing a fanzine, when I look back at the fact Speedball and the Chords were in the same issue, and that was right when the mod revival was happening that summer. I'm also kind of quite proud of the fact that I had the band called the Homosexuals in that issue, and Spiz Energy were in that issue, and I had a DIY Records feature in that issue. So I think in terms of what I tend to use the royal we, but in terms of what we were doing with the fanzine, it was always about more than just the mod thing. So when I actually became sort of friends with Madness, and you were marked very, very marked as a pop band, I was like, no, but Madness are more than that, so we'll have them in jamming as well. We'll put them alongside Killing Joke.
Well, you were never really perceived as a mod fanzine at all. What was extraordinary about you, Tony, was that everyone had fanzines. Well, I knew loads of people who did fanzines. There were loads of fanzines, and it would be, the local bands, whatever was happening this week, and everyone would be, because when you're starting, everyone's happy to talk to everyone. But then you would actually go and interview Pete Townsend. It's like, what?
Who?
Yeah. I mean, how do you? And McCartney. It's like, no, you're a fanzine. You're not supposed. No, that was amazing. That's what completely marked you out.
That's the reason I first bought a copy. I think before I met you, I think it was Pete Townsend on the front of one that made me buy a copy of Jamming.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing looking back at that 14 and interviewing Pete Townsend. And I still marvel at that stuff myself, but I always believe if you don't ask, you don't get. And that's kind of stood me quite well in life. And I also think people are genuinely nice to kids, and it probably worked very well in my favor that I was so young, because I hadn't had the opportunity to become too snotty. I mean, yeah, maybe I was, but hopefully I hadn't had that opportunity. A 17-year-old with a big attitude can be very different from a 14-year-old whose balls haven't dropped yet,
Well, now we're parents, now that you know that 15 is peak arsehole.
Right.
If it is.
Speaking as a parent of a 16-year-old boy.
You're over the worst.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I was always, I think I said a little bit in the book about this, that I do have the theory that musicians relax quite a lot more when talking to fanzines. And you might, you might have got a truer picture than, say, talking to the NME or whatever. Because I think bands always felt that people who wrote for fanzines were a lot closer to them. That they were actually there. They were fans of music generally, and probably of the band. And I think bands, when I look at in the book, when you talk to Madness, we'd really let our guard down a little bit there. And also we sounded quite nervous as well. And I think you caught us at a point when we were thinking about the whole thing and what had happened very quickly, as you were saying, in a couple of years. And I think that's the great thing of fanzines, that you get that people relax a little bit more, musicians relax a little bit more, and you get a little bit more out of them, I think.
Tony, can I ask you a question? Did you ever write about or interview a group that you didn't like?
Yeah, good point.
That you were told to do it, or you were encouraged in that direction by a PR man or something?
Or they were just zeitgeisty that you felt you should?
I don't really have any great recollection of interviewing anybody that I didn't have some kind of affection for. Occasionally, you might come away from an interview feeling that the band was not as cool as you thought they might have been. But it's really funny. Nobody's actually ever really asked me that, and I think the answer is no. I don't think I ever really did.
That's the difference between fanzines and paid journalists.
Absolutely.
Yeah. God, do you remember the last time I saw you? It was 2007. You were doing readings from your book, and I came along and I gave you a copy of the first Pope album, and I said,
yes.
And you promised you'd come and think about joining. I mean, you could have been playing the Dog and Duck, but you just had to waltz off with Pink Floyd. You made the wrong decision, I'm afraid.
Again, against the story of my life.
I know, you missed out. Let me tell you.
My choices.
Yeah, I've got to work on my choices. Oh, well, I'm terribly sorry to let you down.
Oh, it's all right. No, we forgive it.
Oh, no, because what was funny, because I did one reading where Roger Allen turned up, who was Speedball's manager, who, of course, had his own fanzine, the Surrey Vomit.
Which was a superb fanzine. It looked like a total punk fanzine. When I met Roger and saw that he was a total mod from head to toe with a scooter, it kind of bore no relation to this fanzine he'd been putting out, which was this complete wonderful punk comic. But it was actually really artistic.
Yeah, that was brilliant. But I must say that the whole thing about fanzines were kind of the ultimate. It's interesting because, especially, I've always explained this to Americans, right? Which is they don't understand. They're saying the whole point of punk was none of the nihilist, the negative stuff you see. The whole point of punk was this do-it-yourself thing. The whole point is, someone's not making the music you want to hear, then start a band. No one's making, writing the stuff you want to read about, then you start a fanzine. No one's putting out stuff you want, you start a record company. That was the brilliance. It's weird that then turned into the 80s, because that whole 80s thing came from this do-it-yourself ethic, which was born out of punk, which was brilliant. And what's so funny now is when you look back at the 70s, the whole thing was like, nothing was. Just talk about things moving fast. We're saying, because there's nothing, it's just boring old farts, there's no music happening. There had been so much happening right up until then. Bowie was still doing amazing stuff. There's Roxy music. There was tons going on. But it's like there was 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, things were a bit quiet. So, fuck that.
That's right. Roxy Music had gone on holiday for a couple of weeks. So that was it. It was very quiet.
Roxy Music had a long lunch. So we literally had to tear down the music industry.
Tony, the three groups that you like from the mod revival, Purple Heart, Speedball, and the Chords, they all come from a punk ethic and background, and we were all Clash, Buzzcocks fans as much as Kinks and Who fans. I think Speedball were definitely from the punkier end, weren't they?
They were from the punkier end, although, I mean, because Rob could have gone on, he could have been a great Neil Finn type songwriter. He definitely had that. He had real pop.
He was wonderful.
Yeah, and but I don't know. I didn't care. It was a band. I didn't care. I just wanted to be in a band. Frank, I walked into the audition and they said, "Do you want to join?" I went, "Well, yeah, of course." One thing I came. It's like, it never occurred to me I was meant to like the band. It's like, it was a fucking band. There's no way I wasn't going to join it. I would have joined anyone.
I was actually also prepping for this, Mark, by watching Take It or Leave It last night, which has got to be one of the oddest movies of all time, because it's a band acting a version of themselves about 2 or 3 years earlier. Like they're reliving something they did 2 or 3 years ago, but actually without the acting experience and
without a script as well.
Yeah, that kind of shows, actually.
No, don't. I mean, but, it wasn't going to win any Oscars, that's for sure.
No, but come on, with your videos, you guys had there was such a natural thing.
Yeah. They very quickly became part of it, and we, with the videos particularly, and with that film, we kind of learned very quickly how to do stuff very cheaply. And that's, I mean, and the film, yes, you're right. When you actually think about the film now, it's quite a weird thing to recreate what you'd done only a few years before. But I think that was the thing we wanted to do, is just get the story across, really, about how bands start,
Yeah, and there's a lot in there, and you certainly see about Mike Barson being the leader. I'm not sure he ever gets around to asking people to join. He's if he's playing himself, it's a very sort of monosyllabic role, isn't it?
I'm still waiting for them to ask me to join, because I don't think they ever did, really. I just kept showing up, I think. So
that's the famous Keith Moon line as well.
Was there never a contract of any sort?
No.
Have they ever paid you anything?
Well, I'm still waiting for the royalties. I hope they'll come, like everyone.
If I'm not mistaken, didn't you play Madness last week?
That's right. Yes, in Portsmouth, funny enough, at a festival, yeah.
Right, so they still haven't kicked you out then?
Not yet, no. Right. I'm still sneaking in.
I think you've passed the audition.
Yeah, maybe.
But you're used to a thing with audiences, right? But as what John was saying, I had an incredibly eye-opening experience. A few years ago, Andy Mackay called me up and asked me if I'd do this charity gig. And I'm thinking, all right, well, what sort of wide-eyed, fluffy animal are we saving or anything? And it's classic Andy Mackay. He goes, no, it's actually, we need a new roof for the cricket pavilion in the village. And I'm like, all right. And because he's Andy Mackay, he manages to get this band together, which is basically Madness with Roxy music. It's
right.
It's like Phil Manzanera, Paul Thompson, me, Suggs singing. And so we did this set, which was half Roxy music and half Madness, and playing it, because your bass lines are gorgeous. And it was, but I've never seen an audience do this, that when you play a Madness song, they literally all bounce. Everyone bounces, which is why now I understand why you did the first Madstock. There was an earthquake reported, because, but it's amazing. So you've had a lifetime of looking out at this amazing audience thing that no one else has ever seen. No one gets that. No one else gets that.
Hopefully it's become innate and they've passed it on to their children. That's what we hope,
I think this is going to be the second episode in this podcast series we'll do around the book. And for the first one, I reconnected with the school friends who wrote those 3 lovely pieces right up front of the book. And one of them, John Matthews, I ended up saying, what was your favorite memory of that era? What was your favorite gig? And John Matthews hit on John's Boys, which was the jam under a different name. There was a very poorly kept secret, I think, because Mike Reed announced it on Radio 1, so it wasn't really a secret at all. At the Marquee in November 1979, the night after they were on Top of the Pops doing Eton Rifles. It was a wonderful gig. Guy, my recollection that you got in, even if this isn't true, please let's just pretend it is, because the thing was hopelessly sold out, that you were smart enough to go around the back door, pick up somebody's equipment and say you were a roadie for the Nips, and that's how you got in the gig.
I did have this thing. I remember someone gave me this idea, and I used it in the 80s in clubs a lot, which is whenever, and this was just, there's a big queue or something, just find a box. Because there always used to be boxes piled up on the street. It's always rubbish. Just find a box. If you pick up a box, you can walk in anywhere because you're clearly bringing something that's needed. I got loads of places like that. Just carry a box.
Have you seen the end of the film Seven?
Yeah, be careful about what's in the box.
Surprise!
Very good.
Well, as a starting point for that night, that's a very very good memory.
So did you get what did only I?
No,
get
you got in. I was on the guest list, mate.
Oh, you got in.
Yeah. I was kind of safe that night because apart from it being a wonderful gig, It was 1979, and we need to talk about the tribalism that was happening at that point, because at the end of the night, that was the night that a group of very, very aggressive skinheads charged the door. They were really after trying to get it, like, you know, all the mods in London were pretty much gathered inside the marquee, including the Jam. I was actually about to walk out as the first bricks came through the front window. The manager went pushing me.
Wow.
Pushing me back into the front. I know that at least one of the security there got hospitalized that night. Never saw him again. And John Matthews was. I remember him telling me this story like the next day at school, or the Monday at school, because I introduced you to my friend John that night, and you figured out
That's right. And we snuck home together. We had to. It was kind of like The Walking Dead, kind of.
Well, that's how he describes it. He said you would take it in turns as you went through Soho and then over like Waterloo Bridge and back to the safety of your homes, to look round each subsequent corner and decide if it was safe or whether there were skinheads around the corner. Because coming out of the marquee, I think everything was police cars and broken glass. And the reality is that we can glamorize and romanticize all we want about that period of the revivals we lived through, but there was an intense amount of tribalistic
hated
violence. That
element. Also now, because like I try to explain to my son that the music you listened to defined the clothes that you wore, and you had to be prepared to be beaten up for wearing those clothes and therefore liking that music. Just to kids now, it's just like, what? Because I was terrified. I was very out of place and all that. I was so scared. Speedball were from Southend, and I used to spend a lot of time down there. I sort of, you know, semi-lived there in this mad squat. Well, it became a squat. It wasn't originally, with everyone. And all the time I was in Southend, I never once went to the seafront, because it's where the Teds were. And I was so scared. I never saw the sea in Southend for over a year. Every time we had to go outside, if I wasn't with the gang, if I wasn't with the band and everyone, I was terrified, because I was totally method, by the way. I was mod from the second I got up till the second, you know. I used to amaze me when I used to bump into guys I knew from the scene at work, and they just have non-mod clothes on. It's like, what? My thing was, you lived it.
You were Jimmy.
I was Jimmy.
Yeah, there were also very strange alliances, because I spent that incredible weekend that I wrote about in Boy About Town at that building that became a squat in Southend. And the mods and the skinheads and the punks were all aligned, like you say, against the Teds. So there I was like, oh, the skins are on our side. But you fast forward to that night, November 1979, and it felt like the true apocalyptic A-bomb in Wardour Street, except people in bands wanted nothing to do with that. And so, you know, looking back on it, looking back on it as somebody who at that point, you know, was in an audience, it was terrifying, because it probably had a lot to do with why I didn't get to see Madness in 1979, because I probably felt I don't look the part and I will get set upon. And I to be honest, I may be right. I may be right as well.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, because I believe it took a bit of a turn for the worst, that year, and it did start to get very heavy. I mean, during punk and going to see the Clash play, I never really felt threatened, you know, or at all going to those gigs. And they were quite, you know, they were really emotional and wound up. You know, the Clash wound everyone up, and, you know, in a good way, and made everyone feel sort of super strong, I suppose, and super, you know, wanting to do something kind of to society or whatever. But then 79, definitely, we had a big punch up at the Acklam Hall under the flyover.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We did a gig there with a reggae band called the Tribesmen. That was a local area thing. They knew we were from North London, and there were a lot of people from West London who didn't like us being there. So, I mean, even on the Two-Tone tour, there were punch-ups, you know, going on in the audience. Because, unfortunately, I think at that point, different groups of people, even different football teams or whatever, came to these gigs to kind of face off one another and have a punch-up.
When the Chords were on tour, we'd played, you know, the provincial, the places just outside, so Reading and Slough and those places, Basingstoke. And so you'd be the only attraction in town that week. You'd be coming through, and it would bring in all the tribes. So you'd get the skinheads, the mods, the punks, the Teddy Boys, the Hells Angels, the Road Rats, and then you'd start playing, and then it would just erupt. As you say, it was every night. Horrendous.
Yeah. I remember remember the Who did that gig at Wembley Stadium. And I remember going to that on my own as a mod. And I bumped into one of the Southend Skins. I remember one of the South, and, you know, who again was just part of the scene and used to come to our gigs and stuff. And I said, "Oh, I'm surprised to see you here." He said, "Yeah, we've all come to beat up the mods." And it's like, well, that's me, literally. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, thanks for the heads up."
At least you were warned. I mean, it is strange, and I think Jamming tried to confront that later in 1979. The issue after Speedball and the Chords were in, an issue that the Jam were in, actually alongside the Four and Selector. I think we did one of the first interviews with Selector. A night I will never forget, because Selector on stage, which hopefully people don't need reminding, one white guy and I think 6 people of color, and a group of skinheads doing a sort of skinhead moonstop while Zeke Heiling to the Selector. Yeah, on any number, it's simply uncomputable.
Yes,
it was just like, what kind of world are we living in? It was, it's wonderful when you pick up these photographic books and you look back, and I sort of do reminisce, because when I come back to England these days, I'm like, nobody's tribal. There's like, everybody looks the same. Everybody looks the same, but I do not miss the violence at gigs. I don't miss feeling like you're taking your life in your hands.
The irony of that whole far right skinhead thing with where skinheads come from was like, they were the guys who hung out with the black kids. They were, it's like, it's extraordinary. It was this kind of shared outsiderness, and that's why they embraced the music and embraced it. Was that, and I think that even the 79 skins probably just didn't even know that, that history would have been too far away for them to know. Even if it's only 10 years.
And you had to take that, particularly personally, Mark. I mean, as a band, because being sort of the opposite of Selector, you were the only band that had been on Two Tone that did not have a person of color in the band. And unfortunately, I think that gave license to some of these far right skins to decide that Madness was their band, and you had to battle that. And I think that's part of when I came to interview you for The Face. You were still recoiling from a really negative piece in the NME, and your distrust for the media was total, which was why it was that stroke of genius for Nick Logan to send 16-year-old me along in a Harrington and short haircut. But you really had to to battle back against that as a band, didn't you?
Yeah, but particularly very early on. Yeah, but as you say, the logic, it just didn't add up. Do you know what I mean? Nothing added up. Why they were doing this, while they were listening to this kind of music, but still, as you say, kind of making Nazi salutes and stuff. It just, a few years in, it was wearing us down in the end.
Well, but then it switched from you, didn't it? It became the oi thing.
Yes,
then it
exactly.
Like Gary Bushell. Ugh.
Yeah, well, I was mentioning when we were setting this up, I mean, I don't know if this does necessarily hold water, but I was thinking that sort of geographically, I just sort of have this memory, the mod revival felt very much like Waterloo. I mean, it felt almost like Waterloo Sunset. It felt like South London going down to Brighton. Much as I traveled all around London from the age of about 14, I took my fanzines up to Camden Town, sold them at Compendium, probably Rock On if I could have done every single time. I always had this feeling of, that area, Camden Town, which obviously Madness was associated with, as being different tribally. Buddy, you mentioned in an email about was it called the Bridge House, the Bridge Tavern out in the East End?
Canning Town, the Bridge House in Canning Town. Yeah. That was the absolute furthest outpost, wasn't it? That you went to. Do you know what I mean? That really.
We played there with Secret Affair, and it was chalk and cheese. That was not our audience. They were not fans of the Chords, and they let us know. Like Mark said, that's a territorial thing.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Where did the Chords mod thing come from?
Well, we sort of gestated in isolation, a bit like Mark talking about specials and Madness. So over in East London, the Purple Hearts were forming at the same time the Chords were forming in South London, totally unaware of each other, just because of circumstances to do with Quadrophenia, the original album, disillusioned with punk. There's 100 reasons why this was forming. Secret Affair were born from the ashes of the New Hearts, but they were all in splendid isolation. And then suddenly we all realised that there were some people turning up with green coats on.
Because a lot of that, apparently, don't they say the actual real reason behind the mod revival was basically all the kids who got asked to be extras in the Quadrophenia movie?
No. I mean, I joined in January. I joined in January '79, and I walked in with a Parker and a Target T-shirt, and that's 6 months before the film came out. So
no, but it would have been 6 months before the film came out because they would have been in the film.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean?
If you look at the film, there's some very inauthentic looking.
I know the scarves with the wrong stripes,
the beer mats on the Parkers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking how the Chords came about, and Buddy saying in splendid isolation from these other bands. That's pretty much true of Madness and the Specials and so on, isn't it? You didn't really know that there was a band in Coventry doing what you were doing in different ways.
We didn't have that connection. We didn't have the internet. You know, we didn't know what other people were doing. We saw something I think in one of the music press that the Specials had done a gig as well. So it was just little snippets of information, really. And you were just going on doing your own thing. And the only chance you would get to see other bands was actually to go and physically see them live, you know, and see what they were actually like, you know.
Like the whole thing, like, you know, when Spandau Ballet started, the whole point was you couldn't get, and it was the same with the Sex Pistols. You couldn't get in. You couldn't get to see them. You know, and whereas now, turn up, someone's hold a phone up, that's it.
Yeah.
The whole thing's gone, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no underground movement anymore because short of taking phones off people, it's going to get out, isn't it, straight away. Was there any kind of fanzine element around the Madness Specials two-tone thing? Because there certainly was around the mod revival.
That's a very good question, actually, and I can't remember. I can't remember. There was like things like ID had just started, funnily enough, and I don't know if you know that. If that turned into a regular magazine, and that started out as a photocopied fanzine, but I can't remember anything specific to two-tone at the time, I must admit.
Yeah, maybe you got more of the music press coverage and the fanzine coverage, you know, where we could do it. But you also got in the charts very, very quickly, which unfortunately was not the case for Chords and Speedball. Well, Chords got on top of the Pops twice, right?
Yeah, I remember seeing you on top of the Pops. I fucking love Maybe Tomorrow. I love that song.
Yeah, so it is.
Love the key change at the end. Ooh.
Yeah, gets him every time.
I've got this this compilation that at least Buddy will be familiar with. It's 4 CDs, and I am being honest, and I realize that this is probably not a great way for me to try and sell copies of the book, but I struggle to get through disc 1. I mean, you know,
I was going to say, what is that? 4 CDs of the mod revival?
Yeah.
That's a big ask.
It is. A single CD would be a pretty moderate ask.
Stretching it.
To be quite honest.
Okay, in retrospect, I have to agree with you. Eddie Pillar just released a 5 CD box set, I think it was, and I found that very hard going in places. And I don't know if Tony's going to ask this about why the mod movement was here. Ska came up, and it just went like that fast in terms of success. And I think I put it down to the songwriting and the quality control of the groups. So they were much slicker, they were better musicians, they were better produced records, they were better songs a lot of the time. And a lot of the mod revival groups, I'm afraid, just didn't quite cut it. And I think the Ska thing was just much more professional.
Well, it's also so beautifully defined, isn't it? It's so well defined. With the mod thing, it's like, what are you? Are you being the Who? Are you being? Because you know, because we were basically, I mean, we were Speedball were basically a post-punk power pop band. You know, and I think you were just kind of hoping that sort of thing would hang onto the mod. You know what I mean? It's like
mod can't be Dave Brubeck. It can't be Dave Brubeck or something like that and the Who. It can't cover all of that, can it?
Exactly.
It's just music that mods like.
Yeah.
And I think something else that really comes across, this will take me back to spending that time with you in Nottingham and then getting to know the band a lot better after that, talking about Madness here, of course, is the genuine authenticity of it. So so you were actually everything that I gathered Madness were meant to be. On one hand, you were this genuinely authentic, I would say, working class band. And there were a couple of incidents that took place up there that because I kept a diary at the time, plus I was writing about it, so it's all it's all written down.
Right.
You had that element. Well, yeah, I mean, it was incidents with the bouncers. It was getting thrown out of nightclubs. There were incidents. There was stuff back at the hotel that involved waking up Alex Guinness. There was all kinds of stuff that for me this was just like absolute. This is
Right.
This is what you get into it for, I guess. But there was also just that sense of joy and fun that was non-fashion. And when you're talking, Guy, you mentioned earlier about the sea of mass movement that can cause an earthquake that Mark has the pleasure of looking out on when he does these shows. I had not seen Madness until that first night of the TV performance at the Theatre Royal, and you came on stage and the entire theatre just bobbed up and down. From it was 10-year-olds with their mums and dads through to like proper 20-year-old skinheads, all and enough two-tone badges, to launch a few battleships. Everybody just jumping up and down. And so the combination of Madness's authenticity, there was just nothing was faked about the band, nothing. And that was the image, and that image was authentic. And then what that also made it was incredible fun. And I think that's something that you simply can't invent that. It's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. It just felt this beautiful balance of proper blokes making this incredible fun music,
Oh, that's very nice of you.
But there's also, the thing with Madness as well, because was it Langer and Winstanley from Straight Away?
Yes.
That's, especially now in retrospect, mate, I mean, your records are being produced to the same level as fucking Trevor Horn records. You know what I mean? I mean, they were perfectly, beautifully made things,
Very, very much so. And they were a great combination because Clive, was in a band called Death School. So he'd been through that, and he had really kind of his ideas about arrangements were fantastic. And then you had Alan, who was a brilliant engineer who who worked the board. So they were a great combination, the pair of them together. And I think you're right. I think what Buddy was saying, is that made us sound a lot better and made us seem more professional. It kind of puts you on a bit of a different level when you've got this fantastic sounding record as well.
So it's interesting. At the end of the day, this really quite surprised me. When I was putting this book together, it's the kind of thing you do add up when you're going through every back issue of the magazine you put out. Madness were the most interviewed band in the magazine. Thank you. Buddy's lifting up a copy. Guy's lifting up a copy. You had the cover twice, maybe even 2.5 times.
That's why they happened and Speedball didn't.
Yeah.
It's bias. It was terrible bias.
Damn, it was jamming what swung it.
And you were in the very, very last issue, which seems sort of quite appropriate. You were interviewed by Chris Heath, who was already by then a very good journalist. He did with Pet Shop Boys. He actually also lives in New York. He lives in New York City. I was going to say he also lives in New York, where we both live in New York State. And he contributed something for the book as well, which I appreciated. We always felt there was the people sometimes or very often accuse jamming of not being a fanzine, of being some kind of pop magazine. And if there was this kind of, there were only one or two groups that we felt could sort of walk that line. And I think we always felt, well, Madness are sort of our band. Might surprise some people. They might think, surely Paul Weller was interviewed more in jamming.
Yeah, I was going to say that would have been my bet, actually. Yeah. I mean, I will say one thing, Tony, like looking through the book as well, and obviously struck by the breadth of everything, that you do go into a stage, I think you're talking about the Smiths, and you call it an era of new optimism or something like that. So that was quite interesting that we'd moved away sort of from the darker days of 1979. That was quite interesting. Do you remember that? And I was really struck by it, actually.
Yeah, and I think I just went for it. A new optimism for the 80s. You're 17 years old. I was probably 17 by that point. And it does get back to just this unabashed arrogance of youth. You just go, that's a good catchphrase. I'll put it on the front cover. You don't stop to actually think what it means. We did subsequently have breaking down the barriers. And at one point somebody wrote and said, like just name me one barrier that you're breaking down. and I realized that I couldn't. But it looked good. It looked good on the cover. New optimism for the 80s. I think that if jamming had anything going for it, and hopefully had more than one thing going for it, I think that sense of just sort of like enthusiasm carried it through. And I think we did lose that at the end. And I struggled. I have to be honest and say I struggled with including features from the very, very end of the magazine, because I even that final Madness interview, it's all a bit formal. It's all just a little bit like. And
I think we were probably at the end of our kind of, we were at end of a kind of the initial phase of the whole thing, and we were knackered, at that point as well. So we're probably a bit cynical and a bit tired, really, I would imagine.
Yeah, we've all stayed in this game, which is why it was very easy to connect with you. And I think it's worth just having a little chat to say where we've all ended up. The last time I met you in person, Bedders, was playing Recordsthe Day a couple of years back at Music's Not Dead, outside of it at the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill with your other group. So tell us about that and anything else that you have going on, because you stayed very, very involved.
Yeah, and it's that thing of just trying to keep playing, keep your hand in, and that. But I play with a guy called Terry Edwards, who's multi-instrumentalist, and a drummer called Simon Charterton, and we just get out there and have a blast, really, and just play grooves and just use loops and stuff like that. And it's a nice outlet, and I really enjoy that. It's a different kind of music to play. And we get a bit more, we get a little bit more indulgent, I suppose. It's called the Near Jazz Experience. Yeah.
Was that like near death experience?
Yeah, exactly.
The 12-inch I bought that day, I think you've got remixes by Adrian Sherwood.
Yeah, we worked with Adrian Sherwood. That was
brilliant.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
What about you, Buddy?
I'm playing with a group called The Fallen Leaves now. We, the byline is punk rock for gentlemen. It's a kind of mod garage punk hybrid. They've made 4 albums before I joined. I've now been with them for 5 years, but we still haven't made an album. I don't know what that says about me. Hopefully that'll be getting made around Christmas time, and we're just about to start doing some shows again. So we've got Middlesbrough, Brighton.
You went down there for a model weekender, didn't you?
I've never been. I have never, Tony, I've never been to a mod scooter festival as a punter before. Last weekend I went with Goffer, if you remember him, from Maximum Speed. And it was so nice to not be playing that night, so I could eat what I want, drink what I want, get a bit out of control. And it was just a really good, interesting day, and there was a lot of love in the air.
Because I live in Brighton, so
did you pop down and see all the scooters and the...
Yeah, I don't have to. I mean, they're always there, because I've still I nearly got, because I've still got one. I've got a 1966 Lambretta. I've got an LI 150. Which I've had it for like over 20 years, and but it's just in the garage. I mean, and I thought about going down the front, but I thought it's not going to be up to it, is it?
Oh, we're playing the Prince Albert. We're playing the Prince Albert up by the station. So let me know if you want to come up.
I know the Prince Albert. Absolutely. Brilliant.
I'll bring a box and just walk in.
Exactly. Don't think it works anymore.
And Guy, in the time that we've got left, you need to share a little bit more about what you've gotten up to since not making a single with Speedball. Even though I will say the songs were great. I love the songs. I have a demo cassette somewhere.
Yeah. The first sort of proper job I had was I got the gig with Sylvain from the New York Dolls, which is brilliant, which means whatever I've ever gone on to do in my life, I always have this perfect punk credibility. It's like, well, I played for Sylvain. Fuck you. And then I somehow ended up in this Australian band, Ice House, because they were looking for an English bass player. I don't really know how. And they were huge in Australia. And through doing that, we went on tour supporting David Bowie and then did these festivals. And then Robert Palmer saw me playing at a show and he invited me to the Bahamas. So I ended up working with Robert Palmer, and then I ended up working with Brian Ferry, and then through Brian Ferry I ended up playing for Pink Floyd, and then it's
terrible life.
It's it's been up and down, and then after that, Madonna and Michael Jackson and Iggy Pop, the Pretenders, and I all I wanted to be was in a band, like a moderately successful band. I just wanted to be in a band. It's bands I've always loved, and I never wanted to be this kind of session cat, but what I've done is sort of been halfway between the two, and I only play for people I think are cool. I only get asked to play for people I think are cool, people that I like, and I still play with Brian Ferry on and off. It's the longest relationship I got, and David Gilmour I still work with, and the thing I have now, which is a brilliant, actually the most fun thing I've ever done probably, is this thing Nick Mason Source for the Secrets, where I started a band with Nick, playing all the Pink Floyd with Gary Kemp, my mate Gary Kemp. The two of us front it, and it's playing all the Pink Floyd stuff from before it was so important, from before it was this vast faceless obelisk, back when it was a pop group. And it's just such fun. And what's interesting is when I do that and I look at Nick when he's playing and I see the kid on stage at the UFO Club, and that suddenly makes me the kid back on stage at the Trafalgar in Shepherd's Bush or the Wellington, it reconnects me with that. So it's the most joyous thing. And like, we're hopefully on tour next year, but
yeah, I saw it at the Roundhouse and it was very, very good.
Mate.
I really enjoyed it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Bedders. Oh, you should have come and said hello. Maybe you did. Maybe
He did.
Yeah, we had dinner.
That's right. I'm surprised you didn't remember that.
Yeah, that would speak to your wonderful memoir guy, My Bass and Other Animals, which it may be because I know you and I hear your voice. I literally hear you speaking when I read that book, but I reread it in the last year. I reread it during lockdown. It made me laugh as much the second time as the first time. It is probably, and I promise I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here. It is probably the funniest rock and roll memoir I've read.
Oh, thank you.
It really,
thank you. Well, that's quite a low bar. I mean, the interesting thing, no, it's true. But what's wrong with all rock memoirs? Because I read them all before, and you realize everything was everyone else's fault.
Right.
Poor me, poor me. And it's like it's the whole point with my book, and the comedy show. I spent 12 years doing stand-up on it, but it was the whole thing is the main thing is you're so fucking lucky, all of us. You're so fucking lucky. Let them know how lucky you are. And if anyone's going to look like a dick in your story, make it be you. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's really important. The self-deprecation is
but
really...
it's one thing you never ever get. I mean, if you read something like Andy Taylor's book, you think this guy lived his life in a war zone, like.
Yeah. Or did he couldn't get room service? Is that what it was?
Yeah, exactly. Carpet was blue,
That's right. I asked. I asked for you to take the blue carpet out. That is a really, really central, important point. Always sort of remember that that if anybody's going to be an idiot in your story, it needs to be yourself.
Because everyone loves that. We all love that.
Well, Tony, your book, which I swear at and swear by, I swear at it because I'm trying to do my own memoir, and reading Boy About Town, as you know, inspired me, but it also depressed me because I don't think I can get anywhere near as good as that. But you are so honest in that book. There are bits in that book where I go, fuck, I don't know if I could write that. Yeah. It's jaw-dropping at times, and that makes it brilliant.
Also honest about other people. I don't remember pulling the night before the Bishop Stortford gig.
I was there. I was there, mate. I was there.
Was she nice? I mean,
you're the first person who's.
Well, you could remember going out to dinner with me after the Roundhouse, so I'm sure that
I will say I got to see a lot of the world in a very short space of time between Bishop Stortford, Southend, and Brighton with Speedball in the space of about 3 months. I aged like 6 years. I mean, seriously, I went from being a nice, innocent kid who was just turning 15 to a vastly more experienced person in the space of a few months. So were
people foisting amphetamines on you at these shows?
He recounts that brilliantly. You recount your first blues experience. That's right. And I think it's me who just goes, you do know about the come down, don't you? Yeah. What's that? And we're all like, oh, mate.
All right, I do hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed hosting it. It was enormous fun. And, these podcasts, they're promo for the book to some degree, but they really are intended to exist as a companion piece to the book, just a chance to have conversations about the culture of the times, see if we can have maybe a bit of fun along the way, but also hoping that you get something out of it, whether you are old enough and were on the scene enough to have participated, or whether you are so young or were so distant from the scene that it hopefully gives you some kind of historical perspective. I will supply links in the show notes to the various projects that are ongoing by Guy and Buddy and Bedders. And while you're looking at your phone for those show notes, or indeed your computer screen, if there is a subscribe button and you haven't hit it yet, please do so. And if there is a ratings or review option there and you want to hit that, it really, really helps. Apparently there's this thing out there called algorithms. Episode 3 is going to be my one-on-one interview with Better Badge's Jolly McPhee, without whom jamming may not have been what it was, but also without whom punk rock and post-punk wouldn't have been what it was. Very, very important figure on the underground that went overground. That will drop 2 weeks from this episode every other Thursday morning. We're getting these out in part because of the help from Omnibus Press's Greg Morton on the editing front and for coming up with the logos. Thanks so much, Greg. And I also want to thank my teenage son, Noel Fletcher, for coming up with the theme music. Nice one, Noel. And with that, we will see you